I have some additional concepts that I would like to add to the discussion on platform. Let's start from the simple observation that the three largest companies in three very different businesses, such as journalism or media, hotels, and taxi transportation, are now platform-based companies. Facebook is, without any doubt, the largest media distribution company in the world. Airbnb is the largest provider of hotel rooms in the world, and Uber is, without any doubt, the largest taxi company in the world. What is interesting, though, is to ask how much assets do they own? And the answer is zero. Facebook doesn't have any salaried journalist on board. Airbnb doesn't own a single hotel room, and Uber doesn't own a single taxi. So here there is something really striking about the evolution of business in the past 10 years, really. How do we explain that? The impact of this company has been gigantic. Just to show here some very recent data about earnings by Uber drivers and taxi drivers, and you notice something which is counterintuitive, that apparently, according to these statistics, Uber drivers earn more than taxi drivers. What about market capitalization of these companies? Some of those companies are not public, so market capitalization has to be derived from proxies. But the situation is the following. Apparently Uber, and I'm talking about data of last year, has surpassed the market capitalization of companies such as Ford and GM, and I repeat, without owning a single car. The same situation with Airbnb as compared to traditional hotel companies. We see that the market evaluation of Airbnb is higher than what it is Marriott, Starwood, etc. Large companies with massive worldwide physical assets. So we have to ask, how is it possible that virtual companies that basically own servers and have a very limited number of employees can have a market evaluation way higher than companies that have been in business for decades, in some cases almost a century, and own massive assets? An interesting debate about this evaluation problem has taken place between, say, the market and Professor Damodaran. Professor Damodaran is based at New York Stern University and is a well-renowned expert of companies' evaluation. Professor Damodaran ran a well-accepted method to evaluate the capitalization of companies and came out with a figure for Uber about 2.5 years ago of, as you can see down there, $6 billion. At the time, a conservative estimate of the market for Uber was about $17-18 billion. This number was gauged from the propensity of the market to finance Uber's expansion around the world. How do we explain this difference between 6 billions and a figure that really oscillates between 18 and or even $60 billion? The difference is really down to one of the concepts we have already seen in this course, which is network effects. Bill Gurley published an interesting article in which he basically said the difference between the Damodaran's evaluation, the market evaluation, is down to network effects. The article, you can see it there, is called How to Miss by a Mile. How do we make sense of this? We know about network effects. network effects, we saw that there are different types of network effects. We talked about market externalities, in which the value of the good increases with its adoption. We talked about forcing people to shift their preferences. We called them coercive externalities. And we also talked about information externalities. We described how often externalities may lead to cascades of adoption, etc., etc., etc. Let's have a look. Let's have a more detailed look about this externality or network effects, etc. Let's imagine that the situation of Uber arriving in a new city. So Uber arrives in a new city. There are new drivers. New drivers find a demand. If the demand increases, that attracts more people with spare time who want to become drivers. So more demand leads to more drivers. More drivers automatically lead to a higher coverage of the city area. Higher coverage of city areas then influences at least two parameters. The more drivers are there, the shorter the pickup time for customers, which leads of course to more demand, because if you have to wait 10 minutes for a taxi and 5 minutes for Uber, well, you shift to Uber, apart from all the other consideration about the differences of the two systems. But also higher geographic coverage means that drivers have to wait less time to pick up a client. If they have to wait less time, they reduce their cost, which leads of course to lower price for customers, which automatically leads to more demand. It is this aspect that justifies, according to Gurley and according to the markets in general, the difference in evaluation between traditional companies, which we may call pipelines because their value is created according to a pipe from, let's say, from the source to the point of consumption, as it is described in the article I invited you to read called Two-Sided Markets, and platforms. Platforms are different. Platforms are not pipelines. Platforms are really orchestrators of transactions between two or more sides. But going back to network effects, we really have two types of network effects. What in the article, again, Two-Sided Markets, is called cross-side network effects, in which more demand from customers lead to more to the presence of more drivers on the supply side. Okay, so this is a cross side because one side has an effect, whether in sense of positive feed or negative feed, but that's another matter, on the other side. But they're also same side of network effects. Why? Because if more people are happy in terms of customers by using Ubers, they encourage their friends or their acquaintances to use Uber, and the same happens with the drivers. So we can distinguish between cross-side network effect and same-side network effects. It is this dynamics that can easily scale that, according to the markets, justifies the difference in evaluation between the two. Of course, you can have that the dynamics can be toward faster expansion, but if it starts to go in reverse, also toward faster contraction. Because you imagine if somehow the demand decreases, that may have an effect on drivers, and you have a decrease in the number of drivers, which increases which decreases geographical coverage, which leads of course to longer pickup times and to higher costs for drivers, which are reflected of course in higher costs for customers, which leads of course to less demand. So in platforms, as we described when we were talking about time in network effects, dynamics can be very fast either in one direction or the other. In both cases, you have positive feedback, meaning that you tend to have an explosive reaction or an implosion. Platforms, as we have implied and described in this set of lectures, are really different animals from traditional companies. Traditional companies can be compared to pipelines, meaning they create value and they consume value in a sort of linear fashion, and they have got control of the value creation processes, which is then exchanged for a reward with customers. They do not really enjoy network effects, or not anyway on the same scale. In a book I'm going to reference at the end of this set of slides called Platform Revolution, the authors talk about two different types of economies of scale. In traditional companies, you have so-called supply side of economies of scale. You may have seen them in your courses, especially things like the relation between fixed to variable cost, the learning curve, scale to procurement. Of course, the larger you are, the cheaper you may able to procure materials or supply, or the lower cost you may, the lower price you may get from suppliers, and so on and so forth. But notice that they have little to do with consumption and little to do with the price you may get from customers, whereby in an ecosystem, demand side economy of scale become dominant. And by demand side, we mean the dynamic of network effects we have just described in the case of Uber. Cross-side network effects, same-side network effects, information cascades, coercive externalities, and so on. They take place between the providers of a service and the consumers of that service, which in both cases are external to the platform. They are not controlled by the platform, they are not owned by the platform. The consequence of the fact that the assets are not owned by the platform or by the company is that scalability, the capability to extend or to expand, become extremely fast, which is not the case of traditional companies, especially when dealing with physical assets. So one point that we have stressed already about platforms is that platforms are characterized by network effects, especially at the point of consumption, whereby in traditional companies, network effects are way more limited and they take place during the phase of creation of the good to be later sold. Finally, Mark Andreessen, the founder of Oracle, once said that in short, software is eating the world. In fact, we have seen how companies, basically almost all sectors of the world, are now controlled by software. This is intuitively simple to understand because software at the end is information, and information is what gives structure to the world. But with the emergence of applications, I remember we started this platform lecture discussing applications. Now applications are basically eating, by using Andreessen's word, software, which is then eating the world. You see on the right hand side of this slide how traditional companies are being superseded by apps or platform-based companies. The numbers are astonishing. It truly is a revolution. happening, which has been happening in the past 10 years. The reasons why are complex, of course, but we can just mention a few. First, pipelines, traditional companies that create value in a linear way, are more efficient than other types of pipelines because they basically have zero marginal cost of distribution. Okay, so Amazon selling books that owned by independent booksellers has got a zero marginal cost of distribution by simply using a platform based. But also platforms are then eating pipelines because it's no more only a distribution network. Platforms become an infrastructure for coordination mechanism, becomes an infrastructure that enables transactions between providers of value and consumers of value, both of which are external and not owned by the platform company, as we saw in the case of, for instance, Uber or Airbnb. The structural changes that have been happening and will continue to happen relate to the fact that, number one, we can have a profitable business without owning an asset. And the assets that are owned, if you delink ownership from the assets itself, can become more profitable. Let's say you have a car which is used for less than probably 5% of its time. The car can be connected to a platform companies whereby it will be used by a Uber driver or in other forms of car sharing. Okay, number one. Number two, platforms are efficient because in a way they re-intermediated what at one time the internet seemed to disintermediate. Especially markets that are strongly disaggregated or decentralized can be re-intermediated, as in the case we have discussed multiple platforms, by connecting providers of value with consumers of value. So those three dynamics, the linking ownership from assets, re-intermediation of markets that have been disintermediated, and aggregation of decentralized market opportunities, are at the base of the platform's success. Finally, if you want to know more about platform, I strongly suggest this book, which is a highly interesting book. And this closes our conversation on platforms.